Ever wondered if we could just suck all that harmful carbon dioxide right out of our atmosphere? Welcome to our deep dive into the cutting-edge world of carbon capture technology. With climate change at the forefront of global conversations and carbon emissions being a key player, the idea of simply removing the problem from the air seems almost too good to be true. But could such a solution actually exist? The answer might surprise you, as it lies in the marvel of carbon capture technology. So where did this seemingly sci-fi concept of carbon capture originate? Well, let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? The roots of carbon capture technology can be traced back to the late 20th century. The idea was first proposed in the 1970s, during the oil crisis. Scientists were searching for new ways to extract oil from the ground, and they stumbled upon an interesting observation. They noticed that when carbon dioxide was pumped into oil wells, it made the oil easier to extract. This process, known as enhanced oil recovery, was the first practical use of carbon capture and storage. Fast forward to the 1990s, and the concept of carbon capture was starting to gain traction in the scientific community. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, published a report in 1996 that highlighted the potential of this technology in mitigating climate change. The report was a game-changer, and it set the stage for the development of modern carbon capture techniques. The early 2000s saw a significant milestone in the evolution of carbon capture technology. In 2008, the Weyburn Mid-Ale field in Canada became the world's first large-scale carbon capture and storage project. This project demonstrated that carbon capture was not just a theoretical concept, but a feasible solution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The journey of carbon capture technology has been marked by a series of innovations and breakthroughs. The key inventors and pioneers in this field include figures like Klaus Lackner, who developed the first practical device for direct air capture of carbon dioxide, and Howard Herzog, who has been instrumental in advancing carbon capture and storage research. Today, carbon capture technology has the potential to capture up to 95% of the carbon dioxide it processes. It's like a giant vacuum cleaner for our atmosphere, sucking up the harmful CO2 and storing it safely away. And thus, the concept of carbon capture was born, promising a cleaner and greener future. But like any newborn, it has its challenges and obstacles to overcome. So let's delve a little deeper into the mechanics of carbon capture in the next scene. Now let's dive deeper into the workings of this amazing technology. Carbon capture does sound like something from a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? But in reality, it's a pretty straightforward process. It involves capturing carbon dioxide emissions from sources like power plants or industrial processes, transporting this captured CO2, and then storing it away so it doesn't end up in our atmosphere. The capturing part is done through several methods, one of which involves the use of chemicals that bind with CO2. Once bound, the CO2 can be separated and collected. Another method is direct air capture, which pulls in air and removes the CO2. Once we've caught the elusive CO2, we need to transport it. This is usually done through pipelines that move the CO2 to a storage site. And where do we store this captured carbon? Well, it's typically stored deep underground in geological formations. The CO2 is compressed into a liquid-like state, which allows it to be injected into these formations without the risk of it escaping back into the atmosphere. Now here's the best part. Carbon capture technology can capture up to 95% of the CO2 it processes. That's right, 95%. It's like a super efficient vacuum cleaner for greenhouse gases. But you might be wondering, why don't we just use this everywhere and solve our carbon emission problem? Well, it's not that simple. While carbon capture technology does offer a promising solution, it comes with its own set of challenges. The amount of energy required for direct air capture, for example, is staggering. It may require around 8.8 to 14 gigajoules per ton of captured CO2. That's a lot of energy. And let's talk about cost. It can cost anywhere from $120 to $600 to capture just 1 ton of CO2. Manufacturing a carbon capture plant? That's a hefty $400 to $500 million. To put that into perspective, consider this. In a year, we release around 37.12 billion metric tons of CO2. To capture all that using carbon capture technology, we would need to manufacture a massive number of plants, which would cost a fortune. In theory, this technology could make a significant dent in our carbon emissions, but is it really that simple? As we'll see in the next part of our discussion, there's a bit more to the story. For now, let's just say that while carbon capture is a promising tool in our fight against climate change, It's not a magic bullet, but hey, who doesn't love a good challenge? As with any technology, carbon capture isn't without its challenges. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Carbon capture technology is a bit like a high-maintenance houseplant. It needs a lot of care, attention, and, you guessed it, money. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room: cost. Capturing carbon dioxide isn't a cheap affair. It costs somewhere between $120 to $600 to capture just 1 ton of carbon dioxide. To put it in perspective, imagine buying a fancy cup of coffee for every single breath you took. It adds up pretty quickly, doesn't it? And that's not even the half of it. Building a carbon capture facility isn't as simple as sticking some straws into the atmosphere and hoping for the best. Far from it. The cost of manufacturing a single facility can range anywhere from $400 to $500 million. That's more than the gross domestic product of some small countries. Next up, we have energy requirements. Carbon capture is a bit of an energy hog. Direct air capture, one of the methods we use to snatch carbon dioxide from the air, requires around 8.8 to 14 gigajoules of energy per ton of captured carbon dioxide. For those of you who aren't energy scientists, that's a lot of juice. Now you may be thinking, but surely it's worth it if we can capture 95% of the carbon dioxide, right? Well, here's the kicker. To make a significant dent in our current carbon dioxide emissions, which, by the way, are around 37.12 billion metric tons, we'd need to construct a huge number of these high-cost, energy-guzzling facilities. So you see, we're in a bit of a pickle. On one hand, we have a technology that could potentially capture a significant portion of our carbon dioxide emissions. On the other, we have the harsh reality that the cost and energy requirements of this technology are currently quite prohibitive. It's a bit like having a supercar that runs on unicorn tears. Sure, it's amazing and it could get us where we need to go at breakneck speed, but the fuel is so rare and expensive that it's just not viable for everyday use. So, what's the solution? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or should we say the $400 to $500 million question? Unfortunately, the cost and energy-intensive nature of carbon capture technology currently pose significant hurdles to its widespread adoption. So, what does this all mean for our battle against climate change? Well, let's take a moment to distill what we've learned. Carbon capture technology, despite being a relatively new kid on the block, has shown us a glimmer of hope. It's like the cool new gadget everyone wants to have, but not everyone can afford. The technology in its essence could theoretically capture up to 95% of the carbon dioxide it processes, which is no small feat. It's like a vacuum cleaner for our atmosphere, sucking up the unwanted CO2 and storing it away. However, as we've discussed, it's not as simple as it sounds. The energy required for direct air capture, one of the carbon capture methods, is somewhere in the ballpark of 8.8 to 14 gigajoules for every ton of captured CO2. To put it in perspective, it's like running a refrigerator non-stop for about 6 months just to capture 1 ton of CO2. That's a lot of energy for just a tiny bit of cleanup. In terms of cost, it's like paying anywhere between $120 to $600 to capture a single ton of CO2. It's like buying a top-of-the-range smartphone, only instead of getting the latest tech, you're removing 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. But here's the kicker. Manufacturing one of these carbon capture units is estimated to cost somewhere between $400 million to $500 million. Given the amount of CO2 we emit annually, a whopping 37.12 billion metric tons, we'd need a lot of these expensive units to make a significant dent. As it stands, carbon capture technology is a promising tool in our arsenal against climate change, but it's not a silver bullet. We still need to cut our CO2 levels and continue striving for a sustainable future. Just like in a diet, you can't just rely on a fancy exercise machine to lose weight. You also have to eat healthier. Similarly, we can't just rely on carbon capture. We have to reduce our emissions too.